It was just after midnight when the emergency operator picked up a trembling call. A man's voice, low and steady, said his wife had fallen down the stairs and wasn't breathing. He claimed he'd tried to revive her, but nothing worked. The address he gave was in a quiet suburban street, neat hedges, warm lights, the kind of place where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. When paramedics arrived, they found the woman lying at the bottom of the staircase, wrapped carefully in a duvet. Her husband, Daniel, stood nearby, barefoot, his hair mussed as if from sleep. He kept repeating that he'd just found her like this. Yet something about the scene felt off. Her body was cold, far too cold for someone who'd supposedly just fallen. The bruising patterns didn't match a tumble-down steps. And Daniel, instead of being distraught, seemed oddly composed. A detective named Aaron Wallace was called to the scene. She'd seen enough sudden deaths to sense when something was wrong. She noticed the duvet first. It was tucked with precision, as though he'd wanted to hide something. Then the faint scratches on Daniel's forearms, barely visible under the kitchen light. When she asked how he got them, he mumbled something about trying to pull her up. Aaron ordered the area sealed off. A forensic team photographed the stairs, the banister, the faint indentation of where the duvet had been placed. Upstairs, the bed was untouched. Downstairs, a glass of red wine sat half-finished on the counter. Nothing appeared stolen. No signs of forced entry. At the morgue the next morning, the coroner called Aaron in. "It's not a fall," he said flatly. She was gone long before he made that call. He pointed to the internal injuries, consistent not with impact, but with pressure. The cause of death, suffocation. Aaron stared at the report, her instincts confirmed. The body's temperature suggested she had died hours earlier, meaning Daniel had waited before phoning for help. When police searched the house more thoroughly, they found a stretched bathrobe belt stuffed behind a laundry basket. It matched faint marks on the victim's neck. They also seized Daniel's laptop and phone. He'd told them he was a marketing consultant who worked from home, so the devices were key. What they uncovered next was chilling. In his browser history, recovered even from deleted backups, were searches about how to stage a fall, delaying body cooling, and ways to make strangulation look accidental. Alongside those, dating site logins and messages to women promising a fresh start and freedom soon. Daniel had recently taken out a new life insurance policy on his wife, doubling its payout. The timing, the motive, the method, it all began to form a pattern that couldn't be ignored. Aaron and her team brought him in for questioning. He denied everything, insisting his wife had been drinking that night, that she'd slipped in her socks. But every time he spoke, his story shifted. First she fell while he was in bed, then while he was watching TV. He couldn't say why he waited over an hour to call emergency services. When he was finally shown the computer evidence, his mask cracked for just a moment. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Then he asked for a lawyer. Outside the interrogation room, Aaron stood by the window, looking down at the gray parking lot below. Another domestic tragedy, she thought, another quiet house hiding years of secrets. But this one was different. Daniel's calm wasn't shock, it was calculation. And the deeper she looked, the more deliberate it all seemed. The neighbors were stunned when the news spread. Daniel and his wife, Laura, had seemed like the ideal couple, polite, sociable, always hosting barbecues in summer. Their home was spotless, their lives orderly. He was the man who shoveled neighbors' driveways after snowfalls, she volunteered at the local library. Nobody had seen them fight, at least not outside closed doors. But behind that facade, cracks had been spreading for years. Friends told investigators that Laura had confided about growing tension, Daniel's controlling nature, his obsession with appearances, and lately, his distance. He'd begun sleeping in the guest room, claiming stress from work. He'd taken up jogging at odd hours and had a new password-protected phone he never left unattended. Detective Aaron Wallace followed the digital trail, and it grew darker with every click. Forensic analysts restored months of deleted searches from Daniel's cloud backups: how long before the body cools, does asphyxiation leave marks, how to get away with accidental death. There were also conversations with women on dating apps. He called himself Dan R. and said he was a widower. Those messages started weeks before his wife's death. Meanwhile, Laura's close friend told detectives that Laura had discovered the insurance policy. She said it scared her, the friend said. He'd been talking about money, debts, how everything would be easier if she just stopped worrying. I told her to leave him. Aaron pieced together a timeline. The night of the so-called accident, neighbors had heard muffled shouting around 10 p.m. But the emergency call came after midnight. The coroner confirmed Laura had died between 10:30 and 11. For more than an hour, Daniel had stayed in the house with her body before calling for help. When questioned again, he stuck to his story. I panicked, he said. I didn't know what to do. His voice trembled just enough to sound rehearsed. The scratches on his arm, he insisted, came from pulling her up. But under his fingernails, forensic experts found traces of Laura's skin. The robe belt became the centerpiece of the case. Fibers from it matched microscopic traces on Laura's neck and clothing. Daniel's fingerprints were embedded in its weave. When shown the lab report, he folded his arms and said, "That's her robe. I touched it all the time." Aaron knew he was playing for time, hoping for some gap in evidence. But the motive was clear: the life insurance, the new women, the search history. It wasn't a sudden act of rage, it was planned. The district attorney approved the warrant. Daniel was arrested at dawn, taken from his home in handcuffs while reporters gathered at the end of the street. Cameras caught his blank expression as he was led to the patrol car. He didn't look angry or frightened, just inconvenienced. During the first hearing, his lawyer argued there was no proof of intent. But Aaron sat in the courtroom, watching Daniel's posture, the way he avoided looking at Laura's family. He kept tapping his thumb on his knee, as if counting seconds. When bail was discussed, the judge set it high, too high for most people. But Daniel had savings. Within days, he was out, back in his house, free while awaiting trial. Aaron hated that part of the job. He's not done, she muttered to a colleague. Men like him never stop planning. She was right. 2 weeks later, Daniel's car was found at a cliffside rest stop. Inside was a note that read like a confession: "I can't live with what I've done." Search teams combed the coastline for days, but no body was found. Authorities assumed he'd ended his life. Months passed. The case files were archived. Laura's family tried to grieve. But Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that he'd fooled them all. Something about that staged car, the folded clothes on the seat, it felt too neat. And she was right again. Thousands of miles away, in a small coastal town under another name, a man who looked very much like Daniel began a new life. The official record closed with Daniel's presumed death. The car, the note, the coastal currents, it all fit the narrative. His lawyer expressed sorrow, the insurance company froze the claim, and the news cycle moved on. But Aaron Wallace couldn't let it go. Something about his suicide was too cinematic. The timing, the location, even the language of the note, all borrowed clichés. Aaron remembered the searches from his computer: staging death at sea, how long before a missing person is declared dead. The man had studied details like a scriptwriter. For months, there were no leads. But then, almost by accident, one arrived. A routine financial review flagged an active account linked to Daniel's former consulting firm: small transfers, each under traceable limits, all routed through international intermediaries. It was subtle, but not invisible. Aaron reopened the file. Interpol joined the search, tracing the payments through several countries until they led to a coastal town in southern Europe. A man named David Rains had recently rented a house near the harbor. He was charming, polite, and fluent in just enough local language to blend in. He also bore a striking resemblance to Daniel, leaner, tanned, clean-shaven, but with the same quiet eyes. Erin sent photos. The local police confirmed the match within days. A surveillance team observed him working at a small marina, fixing boats, keeping mostly to himself. He paid cash, had no visible identification, and lived modestly. But then he made a mistake. A woman named Sophia, who worked at a nearby cafe, mentioned to officers that her English boyfriend had confided he'd once been unfairly accused of something back home. When she showed them a photo, the investigators immediately recognized the face. The extradition process began quietly. They didn't want to risk another escape. One morning, as Daniel walked to the pier, carrying coffee and a toolkit, plainclothes officers surrounded him. He didn't resist. In fact, he sighed, as if he'd expected it. "I wondered how long it would take you," he said in perfect English. When Erin heard the news, she flew to meet the arresting officers. Seeing Daniel in custody again was surreal. He'd lost weight, grown more reserved, but his composure was intact. He met her gaze through the glass of the holding cell and said, "You should have left it alone." Back home, the media erupted. Fugitive husband found alive. The public, once sympathetic, turned on him. He was extradited and held in a high-security facility pending trial. During the new investigation, detectives pieced together his escape. While out on bail, Daniel had liquidated small investments under a friend's name, transferred funds through cryptocurrency, and used forged documents to buy ferry tickets to another country. He'd planned the disappearance weeks in advance. Even the suicide note had been drafted on his computer a month before he vanished. When questioned again, he was calm but evasive. "I panicked," he repeated. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted to start over." Erin leaned forward. "You didn't panic, Daniel. You rehearsed it. You planned her death, your escape, everything. You just ran out of script." For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes, not remorse, but recognition. "You think you're so sure," he said softly. "But maybe you don't know what she was like." Erin didn't respond. She'd heard every variation of that line. The trial began 3 months later. Prosecutors built their case around the digital evidence, the searches, the insurance policy, the staged scene. Jurors watched as experts explained how long he waited before making the 911 call, how carefully he covered the body, how methodically he erased his tracks. But Daniel's defense insisted it had been an accident, a moment of anger, not premeditation. They portrayed him as a man pushed too far, then overcome with guilt. Erin sat through every session. She watched his eyes follow the photos, the diagrams, the recordings. Never once did he look at Laura's family. When the verdict came, the courtroom fell silent. The courtroom was filled to capacity on the morning of the verdict. Reporters lined the back wall, notebooks poised, cameras waiting for a glimpse of the man who had fooled everyone twice. Daniel sat at the defense table in a crisp suit, his expression neutral, almost detached. He could have been attending a business meeting rather than facing the end of his freedom. The prosecution's final argument was surgical. They showed how every thread of evidence converged: the online searches, the life insurance increase, the staged fall, the robe belt fibers. The digital forensics expert demonstrated how Daniel had backed up incriminating data to an external drive, then deleted it from his main computer, believing it would never be recovered. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor said, pacing before the jury, "this was not a man who acted in panic. This was a man who planned a crime, rehearsed it, and thought he was clever enough to outsmart the world." Erin Wallace, seated near the front, watched Daniel's profile. She saw the faint twitch in his jaw, the tightening of his hand on the table when the prosecution mentioned the dating messages. Those had been some of the most damning pieces, affectionate conversations with strangers days before Laura's death, filled with talk of freedom and new beginnings. The defense countered that Daniel's searches were academic curiosity, that his wife's death was a tragic accident followed by poor judgment. They emphasized his cooperation, his alleged guilt, his attempted suicide. But their arguments were thin. Each was met with another forensic slide, another timestamp, another contradiction. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman's voice was steady, guilty on all counts. A collective breath rippled through the courtroom. Daniel didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the table, his expression unreadable. Laura's sister began to cry softly. The judge thanked the jury and turned to the defendant. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said, "you orchestrated a death, fled justice, and tried to erase a human being as if she were a problem to solve. You will spend the rest of your life in custody." Daniel nodded once, as though acknowledging a business transaction finally completed. As guards led him away, Aaron caught his gaze one last time. There was no fear, no anger, just a hollow calm that chilled her more than rage ever could. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed Aaron for a statement, but she simply said, "Justice took its time, but it arrived." In the following weeks, public fascination grew. Documentaries dissected every detail, the planning, the staged fall, the vanishing act. Commentators called it a case study in cold calculation. But Aaron stayed away from interviews. She preferred silence to speculation. Late one night, she reopened the case file one last time. Inside were photos from the crime scene, the stairs, the duvet, the robe belt. She paused at the picture of Laura's smile, taken from a family album found on her nightstand. It reminded her why she'd never let go, even when others had moved on. Meanwhile, in prison, Daniel adjusted quickly. Guards said he was quiet, polite, always reading. He worked in the library, kept to himself, rarely spoke of his past. Other inmates called him Professor. To most, he appeared reformed, reflective, disciplined. But there were glimpses of something else. One officer reported catching him scribbling notes in the margins of a law book, not about remorse, but about appeal strategies and extradition loopholes. Another found a torn scrap of paper in his cell that read, "Everyone has a weakness." Aaron didn't hear about that until months later. By then, she had moved on to another case. Yet sometimes, she still thought of that quiet street, the cold body, and the man who believed he could rewrite reality. And deep down, she knew, Daniel's story wasn't over. Months passed after the sentencing. The media moved on to new scandals, the courthouse emptied, and Daniel's name began to fade from headlines. But inside the gray stone prison on the outskirts of the city, his story continued in silence. He spent his days shelving books in the library, reading legal texts, and keeping an immaculate routine. To the guards, he was the model inmate, quiet, courteous, never raising his voice. But beneath that calm exterior, Daniel's mind was still working. He had spent his whole life controlling every variable, and captivity was merely a new problem to solve. One afternoon, a prison mail clerk noticed something unusual. Daniel had started writing letters, long, handwritten pages addressed to various law firms, journalists, and even crime authors. The tone was coldly articulate. He painted himself as a misunderstood man, a victim of circumstantial bias and public hysteria. He hinted that his wife's death wasn't as clear as the court believed. Several of those letters made it out. A small online magazine published an interview titled "The Man Who Outsmarted Everyone, Until He Didn't." It included Daniel's own words, "I was framed by narrative, not evidence." The piece gained traction, stirring controversy and drawing sympathy from those who saw him as wronged. Detective Aaron Wallace heard about it weeks later. When she opened the article, her stomach tightened. He was rewriting the story again, controlling the narrative even from behind bars. The comments section was full of strangers defending him, questioning the investigation, even accusing the police of forcing a confession. Aaron knew what he was doing. He'd always believed image was power. Now he was building a new one, the falsely accused intellectual, the victim of a flawed system. She arranged a visit. When Daniel entered the small visiting room, he was thinner but still poised. He smiled faintly as he sat down. "Detective Wallace. It's been a while." "You've been busy," she said, placing the article between them. "Trying to rewrite history?" He leaned back, hands folded. "Everyone deserves to be heard. You built a version of me that fit your case. I'm just giving the world another view." "You killed her," Aaron said softly. He tilted his head. "Did I? Or did you just decide I had to be the villain?" She watched him carefully. Even now, he avoided direct denial. Instead, he challenged perception, twisting truth into shape. "You had months to make peace with what you did," she said. "Instead, you're still performing." He smiled slightly. "We all perform, detective. You in your reports, me in my defense. The difference is who gets to tell the final version." Aaron rose from her seat. The truth already spoke for itself. As she left, he called after her, voice calm, almost amused. "Careful, Aaron. Stories live longer than facts." She didn't look back. In the months that followed, Daniel's correspondence increased. Some letters reached law students, others to journalists looking for their next headline. A few were intercepted, coded passages about unfinished business and second chances. Nothing overtly threatening, but unsettling enough that the warden placed him under closer observation. Then one day, a letter arrived at Aaron's precinct. No return address. Inside was a single sentence, written in Daniel's precise handwriting. "You missed something." No signature. No explanation. Aaron showed it to the prison liaison, who confirmed it hadn't been mailed from inside. Which meant someone on the outside had written it for him. Her pulse quickened. Had Daniel found another accomplice, someone new who believed his story? Or had he planted enough seeds through his letters to manipulate a stranger into acting for him? She reopened the case files once more, determined to check every overlooked detail, every missing timestamp, every photograph. She didn't know yet what he meant. But if Daniel had truly found a way to reach beyond the walls, the story wasn't finished. And this time, she swore he wouldn't be the one to write the ending. Weeks passed after Aaron received the mysterious letter. It haunted her, that short, taunting line, "You missed something." She couldn't dismiss it as coincidence. Daniel was too methodical for random gestures. It had to mean something. She began reviewing every item seized from the original investigation, the laptop backups, the robe belt, the household photos, even the insurance paperwork. Most detectives would have let it rest, the case was closed, the sentence secured. But Aaron knew Daniel's pride. He wouldn't be content to vanish into prison anonymity. He wanted to prove he was still in control. One night, as she reread the forensics reports, something caught her attention. A timestamp inconsistency. The robe belt, the supposed weapon, had traces of synthetic fibers that didn't match Laura's clothing or bedding. At the time, it was dismissed as contamination. But now, with fresh eyes, Aaron wondered if it had come from something else, another belt, perhaps, or a duplicate. The next morning, she drove to the evidence storage facility. She asked the technician to reopen the sealed container. The belt lay neatly tagged and bagged. Under magnification, Aaron noticed faint residue of clear adhesive near the seam, as if it had been tampered with, maybe swapped. But when? She requested the full video logs of the crime scene. Hours of silent footage played, technicians moving carefully, photographs taken, everything routine. Then, at timestamp 2:17 a.m., a subtle flicker, one frame missing, then another. A gap of roughly 3 seconds. Someone had edited the archive. Aaron's heart pounded. Only one person had been inside the digital evidence room in the weeks before Daniel's disappearance, a data technician who had since resigned. His name appeared repeatedly in Daniel's old email backups. They'd corresponded years earlier about freelance web design. It clicked. That suicide wasn't just Daniel's work, he'd had help, someone who'd helped manipulate files, maybe even planted digital misdirection. That same person could easily have mailed the letter. She sent a quiet request for surveillance on the former technician, who was now living under a different address 2 towns over. Within days, investigators confirmed he had been receiving letters from the prison, encrypted under false sender names. When questioned, the technician broke quickly. "He told me what to do," he said. He said there was one last piece that would make them doubt everything, make them think maybe he didn't do it. He claimed Daniel wanted to leave behind confusion, not escape. He said if people question the truth, then he still wins. It was all psychological, Daniel's final manipulation. He hadn't just planned the crime, he had planned the aftermath. The planted fiber, the tampered log, the cryptic letter, all designed to erode certainty. Even from behind bars, he wanted control over how the story ended. Aaron visited him one last time. He was waiting, calm as ever. "You found it, didn't you?" he said with a faint smile. "I did," she replied. "And it changes nothing." "On the contrary," he said softly. "It changes everything. You'll never be sure now. You'll always wonder if you missed something else." Aaron studied him for a long moment. "You think uncertainty makes you powerful," she said. "But it just makes you small. You'll spend the rest of your life telling yourself stories because that's all you have left." For the first time, she saw a flicker, a shadow of doubt in his eyes. Just for a second. Then it was gone. As she left the facility, the autumn wind carried the faint echo of closing doors. The case file was officially complete, but Aaron knew Daniel had achieved part of what he wanted, to leave behind a ghost of doubt. Yet she also knew something he never understood, that truth didn't need everyone to believe it. It only needed to endure. Weeks later, the letter and evidence logs were sealed again, marked final. Laura's family planted a tree near the library where she once volunteered. Aaron attended quietly, standing at a distance as the leaves rustled overhead. For the first time in years, she felt a kind of peace, not because everything made sense, but because she had faced every question Daniel had thrown into the world and answered it with persistence. He wanted the last word. But the world had already moved on.